Donc oui, tendance de la cybercriminalité 2024, résultat d'une étude que fait chaque année SoSafe, sur lequel je vais vous introduire ces différentes tendances. Et Andrew Rose, qui a toute la compétence qui va bien, va développer certains de ces aspects pour vous donner plus de connaissances sur ces sujets. Parmi les 8 tendances, la première d'entre elles, sans surprise, c'est l'intelligence artificielle, très largement utilisée aujourd'hui par les hackers. Le deepfake, on en voit tous les jours sous différentes formes. Intelligence artificielle, donc effectivement, gros sujet du moment, des deepfakes en voiture, en voilà, mais aussi beaucoup d'utilisation de l'IA générative. C'est effectivement quelque chose qui aujourd'hui est extrêmement inquiétant dans le monde dans lequel nous sommes. Le deuxième aspect, qui est un nouveau sujet pour ce qui nous concerne cette année, c'est tout ce qui est piratage quantique. Donc l'informatique quantique, nous en sommes qu'au début dans l'exploitation qui peut en être faite. Mais de grosses menaces, je dirais, planent au-dessus des solutions de chiffrement aujourd'hui. Et on sait que les mois et surtout les années à venir risquent d'être particulièrement compliqués autour de ce sujet. Le troisième aspect, qui celui-là est récurrent depuis plusieurs années, c'est le fait que les groupes de cybercriminels sont de plus en plus professionnels. Ce sont des organisations d'entreprises aujourd'hui, avec des métiers différents, des compétences différentes. Et on se rend compte qu'on est face à des groupes particulièrement bien organisés. Et ça, c'est effectivement un élément de fond dans le monde de la cybercriminalité. L'autre élément du moment, c'est bien sûr tout ce qui est géopolitique, tensions internationales et surtout toutes ces dérives d'activisme, donc les hackers qui s'approprient des sujets et qui effectivement prennent parti ou effectivement mènent des, je dirais, des initiatives en rapport avec ce que la géopolitique nous amène. Ai-je besoin de citer les grands conflits en Russie, en Ukraine, dans la bande de Gaza et depuis peu de temps maintenant en Russie, tel qu'on l'a vu encore vendredi dernier. Et associé à ça, bien évidemment, tout ce qui concerne la désinformation, qui est très largement présente dans tout ce que l'on lit, tout ce que l'on entend et tout ce que l'on voit aujourd'hui. Et ces deux éléments sont très largement liés. Autre élément effectivement très présent, c'est tout ce qui va être attaque sur les infrastructures critiques. On a vu beaucoup d'attaques sur des hôpitaux en France, on a vu toutes les données de Pôle emploi ou France Travail aujourd'hui se faire voler récemment. Le secteur public est bien évidemment au cœur des attaques cyber aujourd'hui et ça c'est un vrai gros problème, surtout dans un contexte, je dirais, où malheureusement le secteur public n'a pas toujours les moyens de se défendre correctement. Autre élément de tendance également qu'on voulait vous évoquer, c'est ce qu'on appelle le prétexting, et Andrew reviendra dessus pour vous expliquer de quoi l'on parle, mais surtout tout ce qui est stratégie multicanale. Alors qu'est-ce que cela veut dire? Cela veut dire qu'effectivement aujourd'hui, les attaques vis-à-vis des collaborateurs ou des particuliers autour d'un email de phishing, ça reste une actualité, mais il y a beaucoup de canaux d'attaque différents aujourd'hui, et il est important de comprendre l'ampleur aujourd'hui des dispositifs mis en œuvre en termes d'ingénierie sociale, et ça c'est aussi un grand élément. Et puis le dernier élément qui est, je dirais, une constante malheureusement, c'est effectivement l'état de, je dirais, de pression qui est sur les équipes sécurité et les équipes IT en général. On voit toujours cette tendance malheureusement à voir des situations de burn-out apparaître régulièrement. C'est bien évidemment, je dirais, très malheureux pour les personnes concernées, mais aussi c'est malheureusement identifié par les hackers comme étant d'ailleurs un point d'entrée tout à fait naturel dans les entreprises, sachant les niveaux de privilèges qui sont bien évidemment souvent donnés aux équipes sécurité. Donc voilà 8 tendances qui nous paraissent essentielles pour cette année. And I will switch in English if you don't mind, in order to give a chance for Andrew, our Chief Security Officer, to obviously develop some of those aspects. But this being said, it will be in English. Andrew, please.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. So thank you all for bearing with me and tolerating this part of the speech in English. I am very appreciative of that. I'd like to talk about one or two of these aspects. I mainly start focusing on the international aspects and how nation states have become much more involved in cybersecurity these days and become much more relevant to us as security professionals. So we've all seen, the Ukraine conflict, and we've seen how cybersecurity has been, or how cyber warfare has started to become a reality. When at the initial invasion, they started to try and use wiper malware and different malicious attacks to try and destabilize society over there. But we're also seeing hybrid warfare these days, where they'll actually have a physical kinetic attack on, say, the power grid, at the same time as launching a cyber attack to try and distract the people who are there. So we are seeing cybersecurity really coming into this terms of cyber warfare, which has been talked about for many years, but is really turning into something these days. And in the Ukraine conflict, we also saw hacktivists coming through. And we saw cyber criminals from the Russian state and the United States starting to choose sides and define their allegiance. So Anonymous was on there talking about how they were going to try and attack Russia. And I think there was a Russian group called DDoSia who were trying to attack Ukraine. So people who are not part of the government are also getting involved in these cyber conflicts. And that's becoming more of a concern in terms of hacktivism generally, because it impacts all of us and all of our organizations. So in Stockholm, a little while ago, somebody burnt a copy of the Quran. And as a result, the national airline was attacked as a revenge attack by an hacktivist group. So interesting to see that the national airline, who had nothing to do with that particular incident, became the target of a cybersecurity attack because just of their nationality. So we all can form part of that. And we saw that in France as well. There was an allegation of French brutality, of police brutality. And so hacktivists actually went and released lots of data about the statistics. So they're becoming more and more involved in our real lives. And certainly, as a member of the UK, it becomes really political. I think we've all seen how the US political system has been destabilized by misinformation and hacktivism being involved. But it's something that we're seeing more and more. So the UK Electoral Commission was hacked recently. And so we started to see our own voter information being released to attackers. And this brings us on to the next phase of misinformation. And misinformation, I think, is one of the biggest critical issues that we face as security professionals and as a society. Certainly within France, you're seeing a lot of this regarding the Olympics right now. So the Paris bed bug scandal, which made it all the way across Europe, was perhaps there's an element of truth, hugely amplified, and got a huge audience across the globe, who never got to hear the reality of the story, that it was such a small incident in the first place. But these misinformation campaigns can be really wide. So there was I'm not sure if you saw the one, there was a Netflix serial came out, a trailer released for a Netflix serial called The Olympics Has Fallen, starring Tom Cruise. Entirely fictitious, entirely made up, using deepfake technology and high production values to try and start to suggest that the Olympics was a failed initiative and it was flawed in some way. So we are starting to see misinformation become so much more important. Again, US politics, Brexit has been affected by all of these things. And if you want a little bit more information about how these misinformation campaigns work, there's a really interesting podcast I've been listening to just recently, which is about the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, which many of you will have heard of. But the amount of misinformation that was going on behind that was really interesting. So the podcast is called Who's Trolled Amber? It's an incredible sort of breakdown of how misinformation as a service is becoming a reality. We're also seeing this turning into more of a reality as well, because there are now agents provocateurs being released into society, sponsored by Russian state, to actually start to act upon this misinformation and give it more credibility by starting rumors, by starting riots, by starting fires, whatever it happens to be, to actually make the rumors, make the misinformation more real to people who are living those lives. So it's interesting to see how it's turning into a reality. It's feeding on its own misinformation. And at the end of the day, it's profitable. There was a tweet that came out which showed the Pentagon on fire. And it was a fake tweet, but actually the American stock market tanked for a very short period of time and fell. And in that period of time, you could actually make quite a substantial amount of money. So the cyber criminals are incentivized by that sort of aspect. But they can also sell their services. So there's a group called Team Georget. And Team Georget will sell misinformation for a fee. And they will create social media waves and impacts that can have wide-ranging sort of stories. And they'll do that for a fee. At the end of the day, I think the misinformation is all about destabilizing society. It's all about trying to divide people. It's trying to damage society and damage people's trust in what we're doing and how society runs. And that brings us on to the final point, which is about quantum. Because quantum is also something which is very much nation state at the moment. It's only the very biggest organizations which are really thinking about quantum cryptography and quantum technology as something that's a reality to them. But the governments have already embraced this. And they're already going through a process of stealing information now, knowing full well that they can't decrypt it and won't be able to decrypt it for perhaps 5 or 10 years. But the issue is that when they can decrypt it, their ability to sow the misinformation with actual nuggets of truth, very controversial truth likely, will create a whole new concept of conspiracy theories and misinformation which we'll have to tackle at the time. And that data is already gone. You know, the data has already been stolen. It's already in the hands of the foreign nationals. It's just now about how long is it going to be before they can decrypt it. So all of these aspects come through to one major fundamental truth. And that is the fact that they are targeting people. They are targeting people's trust in other people. They are targeting people's trust in society. And so it's something that we really need to focus on, is how can we protect ourselves, our family members, and the people who work in our organizations against these very, very human threats. It's no longer really about the technology. It's all about the people side of cybersecurity. That's the vastly important piece these days. I mean, people come to me and they talk to me about, well, people are your first line of security or your last line of security or your weakest link. I think all of those things are unfair to be said. I think the thing we need to take true to ourselves is that people are our primary attack surface. When a hacker looks at our organization, they don't care what firewall you're using. They don't care what anti-malware you're using. What they care about is who works there, what vulnerabilities that individual may have, what social media they can collect about them to create a phishing email, which will be incredibly impactful and allure for that person as an individual, because that's their way in. I think the Verizon data breach study showed that 50% of successful security attacks used stolen credentials. 50%. And no firewall is going to protect you against this. No technology is. So we really need to think about people as our primary attack surface and start to spend much more time rolling our controls around the individual.